Stone Dead, a novel, written by Andy Jones, and narrated by Andy Jones. To have died once is enough. Virgil, Roman poet, 70 to 19 BC. Chapter 1. How do you tell a man like Tony Stone that he needed to die? Alan Hamilton practiced breaking the news to Stone in his head a few times, but couldn't get the tone right. Hamilton had never asked anyone to die before. And would Stone even be up for it? Probably. Stone was ambitious. Mid-40s, still with a point to prove. He was solid, dependable. That's why they picked him. But maybe Hamilton wouldn't have to break the news to Stone. Maybe Raymond Crisp would do it. Crisp worried him. Until this operation started to unfold, Hamilton only knew Crisp by reputation. One of MI6's golden boys. Patriotic, talented, and competent. But dangerous too. Just how they like management to be in Vauxhall Cross. Hamilton made his way up the SIS building, and from one of the stairwells saw the Vauxhall Bridge run majestically across the Thames. The sun was setting, and the dirty water of London's Central River shimmied like a dancing wave. He had gone in the back way, so he wouldn't draw too much attention to himself. MI6 was tactful at the best of times, but any extra discretion was worth having when it came to operations like this. He knew the way pretty well. He'd been to the MI6 headquarters frequently. It was typical for the director of the Corps of King's Messengers. He was based at the British Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office and had regular meetings with the intelligence services here. But this would be the first formal meeting with Raymond Crisp. He'd never met the man in person. It was all teleconference calls and emails. A security guard by the desk stopped him as he made his way to a pair of double doors marked Operations SSD 141. This was the place. The security guard was black, about 6'2" and looked like he weighed about 16 stone. Most of that was muscle. "1 second, sir," he said, raising one hand and picking up a security wand with the other. His neck was bulging at the seam of his tight white collar. He looked like the sort of man who would prefer to be in army fatigues rather than an ill-fitting suit, but the job demanded a more civilized wardrobe. Hamilton raised both arms and let the guard run the wand over him. It hummed and purred like an electronic cat, but no high-pitched squeal to indicate he was carrying a firearm. Not surprising. Even if Hamilton was packing, they would have detected it at the front entrance. "You're all clear, Mr. Hamilton," said the guard, gesturing to the double doors. "Mr. Crisp is waiting for you." Hamilton nodded and headed through. In contrast to the grey, bright and pristine office space Hamilton left behind the double doors, things were darker. A few men, they were all men, were looking at screens. Security footage, graphs, other visualizations. Some were speaking in hushed tones. The smell of coffee and body odor hung in the air. The men stopped speaking as Hamilton walked in. He felt like a stranger from the Wild West who had just walked into the town's bar, causing everyone to stop and stare. "We don't take kindly to strangers in these here parts." But they carried on with their business once Raymond Crisp stepped towards Hamilton from the gloom and welcomed him with a weak smile. "Mr. Hamilton, thanks for coming," he said, and offered Hamilton a limp hand to shake. "Please, call me Alan," said Hamilton, not liking the lack of grip in Crisp's shake. "Alan," Crisp said, with his raspy but upper-class voice. "Nice to meet you in person." Hamilton wasn't impressed with what he saw. Crisp was about 6 foot tall, maybe a few inches on Hamilton, but thin and gaunt. It looked like a strong wind would knock him down. Pasty skin and sunken blue eyes. Slicked back but thinning blonde hair. As he smiled, Hamilton noticed a tooth was missing on his left side, towards the back. This was MI6's best? They headed into a private room, off the main operations centre. Hamilton guessed that it was Crisp's private office, although there were no personalised trinkets, no pictures of a wife and kids, nothing other than papers and a laptop on the desk. Just dark and austere. "And remind me," said Crisp, "where is Stone now?" "Israel," said Hamilton. "Picking up a package." "And he'll be back before midnight?" "Yes, it's about 5 hours from Tel Aviv. I messaged him a few minutes ago that he's to report here when he drops off the package." "Good, good." Crisp sat back in his leather chair, the dull lighting doing nothing to flatter his sunken-in, near-skeletal features. Crisp said, "You don't have to stay until then if you don't want to. But of course, you're more than welcome." "I don't mind staying. If there's a computer I could use, I've got a little paperwork to clear up." "Not a problem," said Crisp. "I'll have someone arrange that." An awkward silence hung in the air for a moment. Hamilton could sense that Crisp wasn't much of a people person. No fluid social skills. He thought that was odd, given how much the intelligence service valued skills like that. After a moment, Crisp broke the silence. He leaned in closer. Though there was no one else in the office, he looked directly at Hamilton and spoke in hushed tones. "I wanted to ask you this, one last time, but in person. Are you definitely sure Tony Stone is the right man?" "Well, of course," said Hamilton. "You asked me to pick my best, and Stone's easily the—" "No," interrupted Crisp. "I don't mean, is he your best? I mean, do you think he'll be able to do what we're asking of him?" Crisp hadn't blinked the whole time they were talking. He was burying his sunken blue eyes directly into Hamilton, trying to pick up any hint of body language that would indicate a tell. Hamilton swallowed hard. It suddenly felt more like an interrogation than a meeting of allies. He uncrossed his legs and leant towards Crisp, mirroring his body language. "I honestly don't know if anyone can pull off what you're asking, Mr. Crisp. But if there's someone out there who can, it's Tony Stone." Tony Stone was going to have to wait even longer for his deep soak in the bath at home. He'd be back in London just after 11 o'clock that night. It was about 6 o'clock in the evening in Tel Aviv, and it had already gone dark. 2 hours ahead of London. He'd got his routine down to an art. Get out of Heathrow quickly, drop off the package, and back to his modest townhouse in Ealing by 11:30. But a text from his boss, Alan Hamilton, had now made it likely to be closer to midnight. "Sorry, Tony. Need you to pop into SIS when you're back. Shouldn't take too long. AH." Stone texted his wife Lydia right after. "Boss needs me to do something else after I land. Looks like it'll be just after midnight now before I'm home. Don't wait up. I'll let you know if I'm going to be any later than that. XX." His stay in Tel Aviv had been brief but pleasant. No delays at the security deposit centre that afternoon where he picked up what was waiting for him. He was settling into the rearmost seat of a private jet, bound for Heathrow and a private hangar. From there, he'd be whisked off in a fast car with a police escort to drop off his package at the office on King Charles Street. He held the white bundle loosely, but with part of it wrapped around his left arm. The words HM Diplomatic Pouch etched boldly on both sides. It was resting on his lap. The pouch was fairly light, maybe a pound or so. Felt like a few paper documents, and some sort of case with an electronic device in it. He had no idea what it was for. No idea who wanted it. No idea why it was important. But that was usually the case in his job. After leaving the military, he had joined the Foreign Office to be a king's messenger. Even now, in this digital day and age, some of the UK's most important documents needed to be couriered physically and securely. A lot of the king's messengers were older civil servants, and their job was for show. Nice work if you can get it. But Stone was part of an elite team, dedicated to making sure the most important items got where they needed to go. Over the years, he'd become an expert at working out how someone could try and steal these documents from him. He had diplomatic immunity, and both he and his packages were allowed to travel unhindered almost everywhere on Earth. Sadly, that made King's messengers a big target. His military training and combat skills, combined with his world-class logistics experience, led to him being fast-tracked into the messengers when he was 38. He was 45 now. 7 years of being a glorified postman. But it wasn't a job without drama. Twice in those 7 years, he'd been confronted by people trying to take his precious cargo away from him. He'd killed 2 men in the line of duty and put 3 more in hospital over the years, protecting what belonged to the crown. Sadly, it was part of the job. He'd served as a soldier in Afghanistan and Iraq. 14 confirmed kills in active service, but he guessed there were at least 4 more. Lydia texted back, "Okay, have a safe trip." No kisses. They married young, when Stone was just a squaddy at 23. Things were getting cold between them. The problems started about a year after their first child was born. They had kids late and were both in their mid-30s when they started. He'd wondered about marriage counselling, but whenever he brought it up with Lydia, she'd try and change the subject. He knew she wasn't happy, but she didn't seem to want to do anything about it. Lydia was someone who didn't like confrontation. He used to enjoy how she went with the flow when they were young. But now, at times, her docile manner was infuriating for Tony. He swiped his thoughts away as he heard commotion up towards the cockpit. Angry voices, getting louder. He checked his sidearm, a Glock 17, 18-round magazine. In a single fast move, he disabled the safety and racked the slide, chambering around. 3 men burst into the cabin from the front, knocking down a female flight attendant in the process. All in black, ski masks. The first was armed with a pistol. They probably all were. Stone's adrenaline kicked him right away. Instead of cowering or backing up off his seat, he ran towards them, each stride deeper and faster than the last. The first man didn't have time to demand Stone give up the package. Stone had already shot him in the throat. He barged up against the assailant, knocking him and the second to the ground. With the white pouch still wrapped around his left hand, he pushed forwards towards the third masked man, stepping on the face of the second in the process. The second howled in pain. Stone pushed the third man's pistol to one side and headbutted him, hard. The gun went off, embedding a slug into one of the seats. Stone could hear the second man getting up from the floor, pushing the body of the first off him. He'd have to do this quick. He launched forward along the aisle, pushing the third to the ground. Stone was on top of him, his weight cracking the third assailant's ribs. The masked man's pistol fell between the seats as Stone fired into his head at point-blank range. Stone immediately leapt up and pirouetted like some kind of violent ballerina. His gun was already pointed at the second masked man, who had staggered to his feet, his back to Stone. The masked man slowly turned around, hunched over, blood pouring through his ski mask. He too held a pistol, but didn't raise it. he could just about make out through the blood that Stone had him dead to rights. Stone didn't take his eyes off him. His white diplomatic pouch, now covered in blood, was still tightly wrapped around his left hand. The Glock in his right was aimed directly at the second assailant's head. Despite the adrenaline, his right arm didn't shake. Stone breathed in deeply, bringing his heart rate down. "You got lucky, son," he said. "Drop the gun, and you'll be the one who gets to live." His opponent breathed heavily too, struggling in the ski mask, more blood pouring through his mouth. Stone's foot must have done more damage than he realized. The masked man turned slightly away from Stone, half dropping to a seat. But in one last move, before Stone could get to him, he raised his own pistol to his head and fired. He was dead before his body landed awkwardly on the seat. Stone checked the pulses of all three men, just to be sure. The flight attendant, who had been knocked over, was just back on her feet now. She saw the horror of the cabin and screamed. Everything had happened in the space of 45 seconds. "Step away," Stone ordered. She did what she was told. He heard her sobbing in the cockpit, to both of the no doubt terrified pilots. Stone checked through a window. A blue flashing light getting more pronounced as it pierced through the darkness. He holstered his gun and texted Lydia again. "Flight delayed. Going to be even later now. XX."